In the English seaside town of Margate, on an otherwise unassuming residential street, there's a strange mystery beneath the surface. In 1835, a homeowner discovered something quite unexpected during some building work: a winding underground passageway adorned with millions of shells, arranged into intricate patterns and symbols. Perhaps the strangest part, before the 1830s, there is no mention of this shell grotto anywhere. Nobody knows who made it or why. It's speculated to be an occult temple, an ancient calendar, or simply a rich man's folly. Potential builders are said to be the Romans, 18th century aristocrats, or even the Knights Templar. But no one knows for sure, and that's like catnip to someone who loves a good unsolved mystery. Let's take a deeper look. The Shell Grotto is located in the Kentish coastal town of Margate, about 75 miles outside of London, on the northern part of the peninsula of Thanet, an area with an interesting history in itself, which we'll come back to. Visiting the enigmatic grotto today, you arrive via an ordinary street. It's really not a place where you'd expect to find something like this. And I have to be honest, I was a bit skeptical before I visited, thinking this might be a modern hoax designed to drum up tourism, but I'll let you see for yourself. Entering via the gift shop, there is a short flight of stairs down to the small museum area where you can learn a bit more about the history of the grotto. This is where you enter the North Passage, carved through chalk, which takes you down to a circular passageway known as the Rotunda. As with the rest of the grotto, the walls here are entirely covered with different shells. It's estimated that there are 4.6 million shells within the grotto, forming 2,000 square feet of mosaic. The shells are arranged into various images, and when you visit, you're given a map of the grotto that marks the location of the different designs. Names have been given based on what the symbols might represent, such as the Tree of Life, the skeleton, and the serpent. These names are a more recent mythos, the subjective interpretation of the creator of the map in the 1950s. After passing through the rotunda, you reach the dome, which opens up to the sky outside. The Shell Grotto is mostly located under a residential garden at a depth of less than 2 meters. It is here in the dome that the grotto's resident ghost, the Blue Lady, is said to be seen. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I didn't see her for myself when I visited, and her identity is a total mystery. From here, you pass through the winding serpentine passage, displaying more mysterious imagery within the shells. Let me know in the comments if you can work out what they might represent. At the end of the passage, you reach the altar chamber, and that is very much an appropriate name because you can see altars on 3 of the walls. What exactly these are altars to is currently unknown. The east wall was destroyed during World War II, but has been recreated with paintwork. I wondered whether there might be some significance to the alignment of the walls to the cardinal directions, but I'm not sure if there is any particular precision. Without knowing more about who built the grotto and why, it's another part of the mystery. The chamber is said to have originally featured a vaulted ceiling, which was removed when extension work was carried out on the house above. Taking a deeper look at the shells themselves, today they have a faded or blackened appearance due to the gas lamps that lit the grotto for nearly 100 years. But originally they would have had a much more vibrant appearance due to the natural colours and iridescence of the different shells. At the entrance to the grotto, there is a modern reconstruction, which gives you an idea of what the colours may have looked like. The majority of the shells that make up the grotto, mussels, cockles, whelks, limpets, scallops and oysters, can be sourced in the local area from nearby bays. However, the flatwinkle, great pub name, is used extensively as a filler between designs, and this isn't so common locally. It may have been sourced from beaches near Southampton, where they are abundant, but this is about 150 miles away. When you see the grotto in real life, the scale of it, the intricacy, the amount of effort it would have taken, a number of questions bubble to the surface. Why was this thing made? By who? And what exactly is it? Before we look at the various theories, we need to start with how the grotto was discovered. The earliest public reference we have to the grotto is a newspaper article from May 1838. This describes the discovery of the grotto underneath Bellevue Cottage, which had recently been purchased by a gentleman who wanted to make some alterations. He directed his workmen to excavate a few feet, but work was impeded by the discovery of a large stone. After some examination, they discovered the grotto with its elaborate shell designs. The article ends by saying that the proprietor intends to open the site for exhibition with a small charge for admission. And indeed, the Shell Grotto was open to visitors in 1838 and has been a popular tourist destination for the past 200 years. Fun fact, David Bowie's biography revealed that he was a frequent visitor of the grotto. There are some variations to the tale of the grotto's discovery, but it is generally agreed to have been between 1835 to 1837. The first person to find the grotto may actually have been Joshua Newlove, the son of the building owner. His sister Frances recounted that her brother had found some loose chalk at one end of a passage near the cottage, and from there uncovered an opening that he could climb through to access the grotto. The siblings and some other local children were able to explore the grotto, but were too afraid to tell their father James. When he discovered the grotto in 1837 during the building work, the story goes that they lowered Joshua down through the dome due to his smaller size. Either way, we can be sure that the grotto dates back to at least the 1830s. But what are the theories about its origins? There is no obvious iconography or stylistic element that would seem to link the grotto to any specific culture or time period. The shells depict a variety of different things, some quite abstract. Throughout the grotto, there are several Gothic-style arches and keystones, but these are almost certainly later additions. You may have wondered whether you could work out the age of the grotto by carbon dating the shells. It's not the easiest material to carbon date, but it is theoretically possible. This is what the Shell Grotto have to say on the matter, essentially that the cost is high and they have more pressing concerns. That's certainly a good way to keep things mysterious. To be fair, it's also likely that all the deposits from the gas lamps might interfere with results. However, a fragment was sent to UCLA for carbon dating in 1963, and this was dated to between 1570 to 1770. Some doubts exist about the precision due to the technology available at the time, and modern recalibrations have suggested a date anywhere between 1710 and the mid-1950s. We have to remember this was only one shell, and there are areas with more recent repairs. Going down a different route, samples of the mortar were analysed in 2009. These reveal different ages, but none older than 1796, although this was a limited sample as well. So, analysis of the materials aside, what other leads are there? Given the grotto's proximity to the coast, it's sometimes suggested that it could have been a smuggler's cave. There's a long history of smuggling in the area. The grotto is a fair distance from the sea, with no tunnels that connect to the coast. It wouldn't be an ideal location to covertly transport and store goods, and why would they bother with the elaborate decoration? The most obvious explanation for the grotto, on the surface, is that it was an 18th century folly. A folly is a decorative building that serves no practical purpose. They're designed primarily for appearance and to provide visual interest. Often they are whimsical or eccentric, recreating structures from the past like Gothic ruins, Roman temples, or even Egyptian pyramids. These decorative accents were popular in wealthy estates in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, and we can find other examples of shell grotto follies around the UK and Europe. The problem with this theory, however, is that there is no record of a wealthy estate existing in the location where we find the Margate Shell Grotto. These are some maps from the 1700s, none of which mark any major estates. Follies were also typically created as statement pieces, as extravagant displays of money. They were often devised by well-off aristocrats returning from their grand tours, incorporating exotic or classical elements. But the Shell Grotto is private and hidden, its iconography varied and largely unfamiliar. It predominantly uses local shells instead of more exotic varieties that might be used to show off one's travels. That said, there is a line of thinking that the grotto was created by Lady Holland. She had decorated the shell house in Goodwood, West Sussex, with her mother in the 1740s. Lady Holland's husband also built a series of follies in Kingsgate, a few miles up the coast from Margate, in the 1760s. So this could be a possibility, but I wouldn't say the most likely explanation. The shell designs are quite different in Goodwood and Margate. It makes little sense that the Hollands would have done something so secretive when their other work was proudly on display. Nor is there any record of the Hollands owning the land where the Shell Grotto is located. If the grotto was created in the 1700s, it's hard to imagine that all awareness of it had disappeared by 1835. Its construction would have attracted a fair bit of attention, with the excavation of the passages, transportation of the shells, and all the labour involved. You would think people in the area would retain some memory of this. R.F. Laguerre, writing for the Kent Archaeological Society, suggests that the grotto was adapted from a Denehole, a small chalk mine entered via a vertical shaft, similar to what we see with the grotto's dome. It is thought that Deneholes function to gather chalk to use as fertiliser. Laguerre notes that the lack of tool marks makes it hard to give a definitive date for the Denehole. If indeed that's what it is, it could range from Roman to medieval, though he leans towards the latter. He argues that the Denehole was reworked sometime after mining activity had ceased. The skill required to cut a passage to a relatively complex, predetermined plan would indicate that the date of the reworking could be from the 17th century onward, though he thinks 18th is more likely. The shell decoration would probably have been undertaken at the same time, or very shortly afterwards. So we have a possible explanation for the origins of the subterranean space, but still no idea who added the shells, or why. In The Enigma of the Margate Shell Grotto by Patricia Jane Marsh, the author describes a claim made by a Mrs. Jarrett in 1951. She said that her great-grandfather, Thomas Bowles, had built the grotto with two of his brothers. They had lived in a cottage near the opening of the grotto and had allegedly sketched the shell designs onto slabs or slate. Thomas, as a child, transported the shells with a little cart, and his older brothers George and Austin did the shell work. She recounted that the two older brothers moved to America in 1812 and blocked the grotto up when they left. Efforts to verify this claim have been a mixed bag, but there are records of a George Bowles residing in Margate in 1819, according to some marriage documents. His profession was a bricklayer. Records also show that a Mr. Bowles, most likely George, built Bellevue Cottage on land which includes the grotto's location, purchased in 1829. In 1834, following the death of his wife, George sold the land and the house, and along with his 4 sons, boarded a ship bound for America. So it would seem that there is some truth to Mrs. Jarrett's claim, though some of their dates are a bit off, perhaps simply from the story being passed down over the years. As a bricklayer, George could have had the skills to excavate and decorate the grotto. Interestingly, a report on the grotto from 2009 stated that some of the more intricate designs were likely constructed off-site on pieces of slate. You can also see some areas of slate in damaged parts of the grotto's designs, echoing parts of Mrs. Jarrett's story. A mid-19th century article about Margate mentions that the grotto had been made by an artisan who had gone to America, so elements of this tale trace back quite a while. Another version of events relates to a Captain Easter, who built the Chateau Bellevue and its pleasure gardens close to the grotto site in the 1820s. Margate at the time was a fashionable upmarket seaside resort, so things like this were fairly common. According to Frances, the daughter of James Newlove, who discovered the grotto in 1837, her brother had been told to look for something valuable underground on the property. This was following a lead given to their father by Captain Easter, so there is a theory that Captain Easter had discovered the grotto in the land adjacent to his property and perhaps stripped some of the materials or removed some of the panels looking for treasure. He then may have enlisted the Bowles brothers to restore the shellwork. There is some sense to both of these as possible explanations, but it's unclear what the motivation would have been. Why go through all the effort to build or restore the grotto and not open it to the public? George had a large mortgage on the property to pay off. There's also the question of where the Bowles would have found the time and resources to collect the millions of shells, many of which weren't available locally. In her book on the grotto, Patricia Marsh also points out that the iconography in the grotto doesn't fit the period, the early 1800s. There isn't much comparable to the grotto's designs anywhere. It seems to feature a strange range of subjects, some quite open to interpretation. The patterns are quite different from what is seen in other grottos of the time. Marsh states, if they were made in the last 200 years, indeed at any time in our recorded history, we could expect to find parallel images with which we could compare them. And possibly, we can, but further back in time. It's been suggested that the Shell Grotto might date back to the Roman era. This part of England was part of the Roman Empire for more than 300 years, and Roman sites have been discovered in Thanet and Margate. To add fuel to this theory, a somewhat similar she sells seashells on the seashore. A somewhat similar shell grotto was discovered under the Palatine Hill in Rome a few years ago, a luxurious banquet hall adorned with seashell and coral mosaic, estimated to be 2.3 thousand years old. Some of the imagery is really quite similar to what we see in Margate, and perhaps it would be even more clear if we could see the original colours in the shell grotto. Another theory connects Margate's hidden wonder to the Phoenicians, which might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. The Phoenicians were an ancient civilization based in the coastal region of what is now Syria and Lebanon from around 1500 to 300 BC. They were renowned for their seafaring, craftsmanship, and trade skills, establishing an extensive network across the Mediterranean. It is thought that the Phoenicians made their way to the British Isles, likely to trade tin in areas like Cornwall in the southwest of England. Is it possible they made their way to Margate on the other side of the country? No one is quite sure where the name Thanet comes from, but one theory is that it may have roots in the name of the Punic or Phoenician goddess Tanit. From a linguistic perspective, this theory holds some weight, and there are other obscure place names around the British Isles that could have Proto-Semitic or Punic roots. This was proposed by linguist Theo Veneman, and is covered at length in a blog by Dr. Caitlin Green, a historian and archaeologist with an interest in British place names. Long story short, as strange as it might seem on the surface, Green and others have proposed that Thanet could have been the site of a pre-Roman coastal trading settlement used by Phoenician traders from Gadara and Carthage. Thanet today is a peninsula, but it used to be an island, separated from the mainland by a 600-metre wide channel. Interestingly, there was a Phoenician colony on what is now known as Pantelleria, an island near Sicily. This island was previously known as the island of Thanet, so it's possible that Phoenician settlers could have named their outpost in England after this island. Margate may also have taken its name from the Phoenician god Melkart, but this is more speculative. No Phoenician artifacts have been found in Thanet to date, but erosion of the coastline over the centuries may mean that any traces of Phoenician settlement could now be underwater. So, back to the grotto, it's not outside the realm of possibility that there could be a Phoenician link. The winkle, used extensively in the grotto, is also local to areas like Cornwall, which connects to the Phoenicians because of the tin trade. There are perhaps elements of Phoenician influence in the iconography of the grotto as well. The 8-pointed star is sometimes known as the Star of Ishtar, a Mesopotamian goddess associated with the Phoenician goddess Astarte. Thanet is often considered to be the Carthaginian version of Astarte, so we might have more connections. Again, let me know in the comments if any of the symbolism jumps out to you. Circling back to the idea of a folly or a historical recreation, it is possible that the grotto was designed to look Phoenician rather than being built by the actual Phoenicians. This would seem unlikely given that study of the Phoenician civilization came after the discovery of the grotto in 1837. Lastly, it has been speculated that the grotto could have something to do with secret societies or elite clubs, which would certainly explain its secretive nature. The late Mick Twyman of the Margate Historical Society, who studied the grotto for several years, believed it may have been associated with the Knights Templar. This interpretation was based on measurements of angles within the grotto and the position of the projected sunlight into the dome. On this note, it's also thought that the grotto could have functioned as some sort of ancient calendar, marking out the growing season. This can be observed from how sunlight hits different parts of the dome throughout the year. During the summer solstice, the sunlight would have been reflected into the serpentine passage, hitting the heart-shaped reflective stones, with the light crisscrossing until it hit the altar niche in the altar chamber. Going back to secret societies, Twyman also thought there might be a connection to Freemasonry, suggesting that the altar chamber could have been used for early Masonic rituals. Unfortunately, I couldn't find Twyman's original research into the grotto with all of his rationale. There doesn't appear to be much in the way of Christian or Masonic symbolism of the grotto, but I'm not an expert. There is nonetheless certainly a sense that there could be a more esoteric or occult undertone. A séance was held here in 1939, and I would love to have been a fly on the grotto wall for that. Some comparisons have also been drawn, albeit superficially, between the Shell Grotto and the Chalk Caves in West Wickham, also known as the Hellfire Caves. These caves were adapted by Sir Francis Dashwood, founder of the notorious Hellfire Club. Here, elite members of society gathered to engage in debauchery and quasi-pagan rituals. It's hard to imagine the Shell Grotto would have been a great venue for the club. It's hard to access and quite confined, not an ideal space for important people to let loose. Some final strange observations about the Shell Grotto. There is a gap between the bottom of the shell mosaic and the floor, suggesting at some point the floor had been altered. Perhaps there was a material that was stripped, possibly something valuable like marble. There are restored areas where the shell work was of inferior quality, suggesting that panels may have been removed at some point. Perhaps someone who discovered the site was looking for treasure. Potentially the Bowles brothers may have restored some of these areas, instead of creating the grotto from scratch. Another thing worth mentioning is that there was another mysterious grotto discovered in Margate in the early 1800s. The Kent Archaeological Society, in a longer piece about the Shell Grotto, mentions that a superficially similar structure was discovered 31 years earlier near the High Street. References to this can be found in a news article from 1804, which describes the grotto as quadrangular with a sort of wagon roof, plentifully adorned with valuable shells of various sizes. In one corner there was a vessel seemingly for holy water, and on one side an altar, giving the impression that this was a space for Catholic practice. This was the interpretation in the article, but it's possible that it was constructed for a different cause, perhaps the same as the Shell Grotto, but was repurposed with a more Christian theme. The Archaeological Society note that there has been some confusion over the years as to whether the article was talking about the Shell Grotto, but the High Street is over half a kilometre away, and this other grotto is described very differently. The article mentions painted glasswork bearing the name of a Dutch lady and the date 1612, but it's unclear if this relates to the grotto's construction or something else. So maybe this other grotto relates to the Shell Grotto, maybe it doesn't. Unfortunately, the shell panels were removed at some point after its discovery, so it can't be examined today. The Shell Grotto Museum claim that the site ranks among the most intriguing and most mysterious structures in the world, and I'm kind of inclined to agree. It's certainly one of the strangest things I've seen in the UK, at least. My take is that the grotto was most likely discovered and perhaps amended in the early 1800s by the Bowles and/or Captain Easter. I don't think it was entirely created by them. I think there'd be more records of this, but perhaps they restored some areas, and the stories become embellished over the years. The thing I find really interesting about this is the relative recentness of this lost piece of history. It's still a relic of something where the provenance and meaning have been entirely forgotten. It's mad to me that when this place was discovered in the 1830s that there was zero record. It makes you wonder what else might be hidden beneath our houses and cities, entire worlds that have been lost to time. I guess with the Shell Grotto, if it was some sort of occult shrine or something created by a secret society, you can understand that there would have been an air of secretiveness. Perhaps it was deliberately hidden away after it served its purpose, or its builders had moved on. Maybe that's why there were never any records, and it was closed up as if it was never there. If it was an 18th century folly, it's kind of more interesting that there are no records, or even vague awareness or memories in the local area. Very strange. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments about the most mysterious places you visited. I love a good mystery, and if you do too, make sure you're subscribed for our future investigations, and I will see you next time.